Hey there, and welcome back to the soft spoken space. I'm back with another house sitting story, and I've also leveled up the audio with a shiny new Rode NT USB Plus mic because spooky tales deserve silky sound. I hope you enjoy this one. Let's dive in. What if someone kept showing up during a house sit, but you were never quite sure how they got in? Well, this happened to me. I was house sitting for a quiet couple. Elizabeth, Liz for short, and David with 2 cats and a garden full of orchids. And then there was the guy who said he was just checking on the pool, and honestly, it didn't seem strange. The first time I house sat for them, everything felt perfectly ordinary. Quiet street, orchids lined up neatly on the patio, the kind of place that smells like fresh laundry and just baked cookies, probably because they actually baked cookies often. The homeowners were retired school teachers in their mid-60s. Liz was the chatty one, brilliant at lists, instructions, and insisting the decorative tea towels were for looking, not using, in quotes. Dave was quieter, with a gentle shuffle and a habit of humming half-remembered Beatles songs under his breath. They presented me with a printed binder with emergency contacts, Wi-Fi passwords, and the correct way to mist the orchids. It was all very teacherly, organised, slightly laminated. Even though I'm a fully grown adult, Liz made me feel like I was back in year 5 and desperately hoping for an A+ on my house-sitting report card. I half expected they might request a parent-teacher conference at any given moment. I was looking after their 2 cats, Doreen and Mrs. Montgomery. Yes, Mrs. Montgomery. Full title always. No nickname and no finding shortcuts for her 5-syllable strong name. Doreen had the personality of a woman who once ran a HR department and never quite let it go. She slept on crisp folded towels and gave me pointed looks if I was ever late with breakfast. Mrs. Montgomery, on the other hand, had the air of an aging Hollywood showgirl, prone to dramatic flops across sunbeams on the floor and occasional bursts of what I can only describe as interpretive yowling. Neither of them liked to be touched or looked at for too long. They were always nearby, lurking and observing. One thing I noticed, strange but not strange enough to mention, was a faint smell that showed up now and then. Cinnamon gum, maybe? Not baking spice or potpourri, just that unmistakable sweet scent. I assumed it was coming from somewhere in the laundry, maybe an air freshener tucked behind a shelf. I didn't think much of it, not then. The very first time I had house sat for them, halfway through my stint, their son Toby came by to test the pool water. We waved, exchanged a quick hello. He seemed nice enough, didn't stay long and kept to himself. Just in and out through the side gate. I logged it as one of those blink and you miss it interactions. A familiar face if I ever sat there again, which, as it turned out, I did. The second time I stayed there, things felt different. Not in a bad way, just different, like walking into a room where the furniture's been moved slightly. Everything looks the same. You can feel that it isn't. The homeowners, Liz and Dave, had invited me back for another 7-day stay. Same cats, same binder, and same perfectly vacuumed welcome mat with the word home printed in faded cursive, except this time there was someone else staying downstairs, a Japanese exchange student named Kiko. She was polite, quiet, maybe 20 or so, studying architecture, I think. We shared the kitchen and mostly kept to our own routines, me house-sitting and reading mystery novels in the sunroom or working on my laptop outside, and Kiko would take her laptop to work cross-legged on the patio. Doreen, the cat, however, was not impressed. She perched on the hallway table like a suspicious Victorian aunt watching Kiko come and go. You got the feeling that Doreen would file a formal complaint if she had thumbs and a typewriter. Every time Kiko went near the fridge, Doreen repositioned herself so she could glare at her from a new angle. Mrs. Montgomery, however, adjusted far more quickly, by which I mean she resumed her usual campaign of dramatic sprawls across freshly cleaned furniture. One afternoon, she managed to knock over a water glass just by stretching. She didn't even flinch, just yawned and rolled over like a retired diva who's decided gravity is someone else's problem. Even she had her moments. More than once I caught her staring at the laundry door, not hissing, not growling, just watching, tail stiff, eyes locked on the frame like she was waiting for someone to knock. And there was something else, a smell. I noticed it again on the third day. Cinnamon gum. Not subtle, not baked goods kind of cinnamon, that sugary, spicy, artificial scent like someone had just unwrapped a piece of gum and left it on the kitchen bench for a second too long. It hit me in the hallway, right between the kitchen and the back door, and then it was gone, just passed through like someone walking by. I checked the bin, nothing, no wrappers, no gum stuck to the bottom of a shoe. I assumed Kiko was chewing something, though I hadn't seen her once with food that wasn't rice crackers or yogurt in a jar. Still, I filed it under odd, but not that odd. That afternoon, I was in the lounge with a book. Doreen was beside me on the armrest, slowly trying to push the remote onto the floor like it had offended her. Mrs. Montgomery was curled up in a chair across the room, paws tucked neatly, tail twitching like she just heard some local gossip and was holding back commentary. Then I heard a voice. "Just checking the pool." I looked up, familiar, friendly. Not a knock, not the doorbell, just a casual shout, like someone who already belonged there. I stood up and stepped towards the sliding door. Toby walked past the window, heading towards the gate. Same hoodie, same easy wave, exactly the same as last time I'd house sat. And when I opened the door, he was already gone. The side gate was shut. The street was quiet. No footsteps, no car, just the rustle of trees and Mrs. Montgomery hopping down off the couch with a thud, like someone had interrupted her nap schedule, and heads would roll. That night, everything in the house seemed just slightly out of sync. Every clock, on the microwave, on the oven, on my phone, showed a different time. Not by much, just a few minutes, enough to notice. Doreen kept circling the dining table like she was building up to deliver a PowerPoint presentation on unacceptable household standards. Mrs. Montgomery had wedged herself under the armchair and refused to come out, not even when I rattled the emergency tin of tuna reserved for emotionally manipulative cat negotiations. I was brushing my teeth when I caught it again. That cinnamon smell, stronger now, like someone had just unwrapped gum and then disappeared before the scent had a chance to settle. I stepped into the kitchen to switch off the light, and there he was, Toby, standing barefoot by the back door, hands in his hoodie pockets like he'd just come in from the garden. He gave me a quick smile and said, "Just grabbing the mail for Mum." He nodded towards the stack of envelopes on the bench but didn't move. I opened my mouth to say something about it being a little late. Mrs. Montgomery shot into the room like a missile. She skidded halfway across the kitchen tiles, saw Toby and let out a guttural growl before hightailing it down the hallway. I turned quickly to follow her, heart pounding more from the jump scare she'd just given me than anything else, and when I came back a few seconds later, Toby was gone. No sound, no door creaking open, no footsteps, and the mail was still sitting on the bench, exactly where it had been. The next morning, Kiko was already up and sitting at the kitchen bench with a bowl of oats and yogurt, her laptop open like she was preparing to run a small government. Beside her was a perfectly folded paper crane. I asked if she'd seen Toby the night before. She nodded politely, setting her spoon down. "Yes, he came, to check the window. Said maybe he will come back later. He smelt funny." I paused mid-pour of tea. "Cinnamon gum?" She gave a small smile. "Yes, he's always chewing that one. The smell is funny." And she picked up her spoon again and continued eating like it was nothing. Here's the thing, I'd been smelling it too, stronger lately, in rooms that Toby had never gone in, moments before he appeared and sometimes even after he was gone. Life kept going on. The days passed on my house sit. Kiko kept studying. The cats kept doing whatever it is cats do when we're not looking. And Toby started showing up more. Once I came home from a walk and he was standing out the front, staring at the garden. "Mum's orchids are struggling a little," he said without turning to look at me. "Hang on, let me put these bags inside, then I'll come back and move them," I said. I walked past him, juggling grocery bags, and set them down inside. It didn't even take a full minute. When I stepped back outside, he was gone. No footsteps. No sound, no sign of anyone walking down the street. "Huh?" I muttered to myself. Well, that was weird. He just left. I stood there, staring at the orchids, then instantly spiraled into a panic about them. I was absolutely certain Liz would be drawing up an imaginary report card on my house-sitting performance. And those orchids, they were my most likely ticket to a D- if I didn't act fast. Doreen had become more dramatic than usual, positioning herself in doorways and staring pointedly at corners like she was monitoring paranormal activity on a little clipboard. Every time Toby was nearby, she'd follow him with her eyes like she was waiting for him to confess to a crime. If she'd had a badge, she'd have asked him to step outside of the vehicle. Mrs. Montgomery, meanwhile, began performing spontaneous interpretive scrambles at strange hours. At one point, she launched herself full speed down the hallway, skidded under the hallway runner, emerged looking betrayed, and then stared at the closed bathroom door as if it owed her rent. Somewhere between 2 a.m. one morning, I woke with a jolt, not to a bang or a scream, or even a creak, but to the distinct, unmistakable crunch of something being bitten in half, sharp, dry, close. It sounded like someone biting into a thick cracker or a stale piece of toast right next to my ear. I lay there frozen, my eyes adjusting to the dark. Nothing moved, and then another crunch, followed by that weird, spicy sweetness in the air. Cinnamon. I sat up slowly. The hallway light wasn't on. The cats weren't on the bed. That's when I heard the sound of claws skidding on the floorboards. A thump, a second thump. I crept out to the hallway. Doreen was halfway up the stairs, fur puffed out like she'd been electrocuted. Her tail was inflated to comical proportions, She looked like an angry pipe cleaner. She locked eyes with me, then darted down the stairs like she was chasing something I couldn't see. Mrs. Montgomery stood planted outside the linen closet, rigid, head crooked slightly. Her ears were flat and her eyes were wide, as if someone had just whispered a threat in a language only cats understood. Then another sound, a polite cough, followed by the soft footsteps on tile. I turned and saw Kiko at the bottom of the stairs, dressed in a hoodie, hair slightly askew from sleep. She blinked up at me. "Did you hear Toby just now?" I frowned. "What? He's here now?" She nodded, hesitating. "I think maybe I hear him in the kitchen. He's chewing gum very loud." My skin prickled. I hadn't heard gum chewing. I'd heard biting and cracking, the kind of noise that doesn't come from a stick of gum, more like a cracker. I didn't say that out loud. Right on cue, Doreen skidded back into the hallway, yowling like she was halfway through a Shakespearean monologue. "Maybe we sleep now," Kiko offered, managing a small, overly polite smile. I nodded, "Yeah, let's. Probably just the house creaking or something." She bowed slightly and padded back towards the stairs. I turned and opened the linen cupboard for some strange reason. Inside, nothing unusual, just towels, spare light bulbs, a hot water bottle, and on the top shelf, sitting neatly in the centre, an open pack of cinnamon gum. One stick missing, its wrapper folded beside it. I closed the cupboard quickly. By my last few days house-sitting, I'd started getting a little annoyed. Not scared or creeped out, just genuinely irritated. Toby was popping in so often it was starting to feel like he was the one house-sitting, and I was just there as a weird, uninvited guest. Once I found him on the patio inspecting the orchids like he'd never left. "Mum's been overwatering this one," he muttered, without looking up. "She never listens." I smiled politely, even offered him tea. He declined, said he was just passing through. Then he lingered by the sliding door like he was debating something and said, "You're doing a good job, by the way. The cats like you." Which would have been comforting if it weren't for the fact that Mrs. Montgomery had spent the past 3 days acting like I'd stolen her identity, and Doreen had twice tried to push my toothbrush off the bathroom sink. That night, over dishes, I asked Kiko, "Has Toby been around much, Kiko, like before I started my house sit?" She looked up from rinsing a mug, brow furrowed slightly. Yes. First time I meet him, maybe 3 days ago, when he came to check the pool." She said it like it was nothing, just a new person in the house. "So you hadn't met him before that?" I asked. She shook her head. "No, I moved here only 2 weeks ago, before you came. I see him in all the photos, so I know the face." She smiled. That night I found both cats sitting in the hallway, perfectly still, side by side, staring at the back door. I stood there watching them for a while, half expecting the door to open. It didn't. Mrs. Montgomery licked her paw dramatically and then gave me a look like, "Well, are you going to deal with this or not?" I didn't sleep well that night. Toby continued to show up. He never knocked, never texted ahead. There he'd be, on the back steps, or checking the pool skimmer, or looking at the letterbox like it was his full-time job. One afternoon I found him sitting at the patio table, staring out at the lawn. He looked up and said, "Mum used to sit here. She'd fall asleep with a book on her face." He smiled faintly, almost to himself. "It's good someone's here," he said quietly. "It feels less empty." Before I could respond, he stood up, gave a small nod and walked back through the garden gate. That evening, both cats curled up at the end of my bed. Mrs. Montgomery placed one paw neatly over my knee like a weighted blanket. Doreen stared at the door, I drifted off eventually. Sometime around 4 a.m. I woke with a distinct feeling that someone had just left the room. The smell of cinnamon lingered, faint but warm. Liz and Dave got back on a Thursday afternoon. I was still there when they arrived. Same smiling faces, same suitcases with the fraying luggage tag. They thanked me for looking after the cats, who, in true feline fashion, barely acknowledged their return. Doreen stalked off. Mrs. Montgomery sprawled upside down on the welcome mat like she'd owned the house for decades. We had tea in the kitchen and a quick catch-up about their travels. The orchids looked healthier. The basil had survived. Everything felt normal again. So I brought it up casually. Toby's been popping in a fair bit. Handy having him nearby, really. He checked the pool and helped Kiko with a window. But I trailed off when I saw their expressions. Dave stopped mid-paw. Liz went very still, like someone had just opened a door to a room she didn't want to look into. Toby, she repeated, almost too softly. I nodded. Yeah, he's been around almost every day. Toby passed away 2 years ago, just after his birthday, she said. My throat immediately went dry. Liz blinked down at her tea. We don't really talk about it much. Dave doesn't like to, she said. She gently tapped her chest. Dave didn't speak. He just stared out the window like he was watching something move in the garden, but there was nothing there. I stood up and gave Liz a long, quiet hug. She didn't say a word. She just hugged me back just as tightly. On my way out, I walked past the pool one last time. I don't know why I stopped. Habit, maybe, or something else. The skimmer basket, the one Toby always checked, was open. I crouched down beside it, and there, nestled between a soggy jacaranda leaf, was a gum wrapper, red and silver, folded neatly. Cinnamon, just one. I hesitated and then reached in and picked it up. The scent hit me immediately, sweet and sharp, like a memory trying to resurface. From behind me I heard the sliding door open. Everything okay? Liz called from the doorway. I turned and held up the wrapper. I just found this in the skimmer box, Liz. She squinted out at me and smiled, small but knowing. Toby used to chew those sickly sweet things all the time. We were forever finding them in his pockets, in the pool, everywhere. She paused, gaze flicking towards the skimmer basket. He always checked the pool even when he lived here. I nodded and didn't say anything else, just walked over to Liz and handed her the wrapper. She held it close to her chest. I headed out the side gate. The breeze shifted slightly, carrying with it the faintest trace of cinnamon, and with that I said goodbye to the house, to the pool, and maybe to Toby too. Thanks for listening to more Tales by a House Sitter. If you enjoyed this story, I'd love it if you gave it a like or subscribe to hear the next one. Every little tap helps this tiny channel reach more curious ears. You can also leave a comment below. I'd love to know what has stayed with you from my stories so far. Thanks for listening. Until next time, good night.